Welcome to another Lean In event entitled Enough About the Why, Let's Talk About the How. We have our esteemed panel here with us who are going to be discussing DEI implementation. But before we begin, I would encourage everybody to become a member of Lean In. It's easy and it's free. All you have to do is click on that big red button on our website on leanincanada.com. And you'll be on our mailing list so that you don't miss out exciting events like these. So, welcome to our event. I'm so happy to introduce our panel. First on our panel, we have Sherry. Sherry McMillan is an insightful and enthusiastic thought leader. With more than 30 years of experience in technology, she is devoted to building and supporting great teams, great cultures, and great products. We're so happy to have you here with us, Sherry. Next, we have Fariba. Fariba Pacheleh is a passionate and high-performance leader specializing in integrating and delivering project management and information technology solutions for strategic success. She has also recently received the top 25 Canadian Immigrant Awards in 2020 for her community and volunteer work towards creating more diversity and inclusive work environments in Canada's tech sector. Thank you so much for joining us, Fariba. And last, but certainly not the least, we have Tina Mary on our panel. She has an extensive production track record in games and software development, shipping over 25 AAA video games while leading large global teams under a distributed development team model. She is certified in both cultural intelligence and unconscious bias frameworks, and she leverages production, project management, and global leadership experiences to help organizations improve effectiveness while supporting inclusion, innovation, and production excellence, particularly when working with distributed teams. Thank you so much for joining us, Tina. All right, so without much ado, let's start with the first question that we've been dying to know more about. So my first question to the panel is, what are some of the biggest challenges or obstacles that companies face with DEI today? And DEI here refers to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there are various other acronyms that are used, that is DEI, EDI, etc. But we're going to be using DEI today, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Tina, why don't you start us off?
Thank you so much, Amrita, and thank you for those lovely introductions. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many great faces. There are a number of big challenges. I would say the very top one, the one that's consistent for a lot of organizations, is a lack of a clear and sustainable strategy of why they're doing what they're doing, tying it back to the organizational mission and really defining what does diversity and inclusion mean for us, because it means different things for different companies, different regions of the world, different parts of your organization even. So when we're not having a clear strategy, we're not able to have a way to address changes at a systemic level that impact things that make a difference in diversity and inclusion. We're not building accountability. We're not measuring impact and progress. So all of those things end up lacking when we miss that overarching sustainable strategy that ties to the company mission. And it also is this recognition that we need to know that it's a long-term commitment. It's a journey, right? It's not just a one-stop tick box of getting something done. We need to build a sense of embracing achievements along the way so that we can feel, oh yeah, we're actually achieving something as an organization. Because a lot of people are going to feel this is a net-sum game, right? There's people saying, I'm just going to lose out of this. What am I gaining out of it? So we need to find ways to show them what the organization and they are getting out of it regularly. I'll leave it to my other panelists to maybe weigh in on other challenges they think they've seen.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that, Tina, but I want to also add something. Like, we are coming, especially now, out of the pandemic, and there are resource challenges, the efforts that's required for implementing anything that we want to do. And if you think about it, like big organizations like universities or big public companies, they are going to have millions of processes maybe. Then which one I'm going to tackle first, even if they want to do that? I mean, how we are going to implement it. So they know that is a business case for it. They know that they need to do that. And there is a need in the actually the movement that has started, even if they don't want to do it, they have to in some ways, but where to start? how big we can go, and what are the basically practices that they can implement without that much of an effort. I think that would be one of the biggest challenges they should have right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. I'll also add that to your point, Tina, about strategy, I think that there's absolutely the overarching strategy and coming from the top down and having that buy-in and the support. But I think another thing to really think about is, what is your strategy even for an ERG? So what is your ERG? And a real tactical thing is, you're setting up an ERG and you're having a steering committee. What is the job of that steering committee? It's the job to facilitate and organize and support volunteers who then go out and create activities and events, or is the steering committee themselves responsible for those activities and events? Exactly. If it's for women, are we saying that this is a safe place where we are having women only, or are we saying no, we want to ally with men and every gender is welcome? Just really fundamental questions that sometimes get tossed aside in the effort to just get something going. And quite frankly, I'll also put in there to Amrita, your original question, like what's our biggest challenge? I would just toss out the really big things of like compassion and other burnout. And Fariba, you mentioned the pandemic, absolutely. Yeah. And then a little cynicism, and for good reason, because sometimes the reason why people are cynical about participating in ERG is they're like, well, I've done this before and we didn't know what we were doing, it fell apart, or why is it all on our shoulders? We need support. So I would just say, and I'm a business analyst by trade. So of course I am fully invested in taking the time to do some analysis before you implement, that it's always worth the return on investment. I don't believe in analysis paralysis. I think it's analyst catalyst. So I would assign that same lens to ERG and to DEI to have some fundamental markers for success before you get going.
Mm-hmm. And Sherry, as someone with a project management practice at my back, I totally agree with you. I think that's the way to go. But again, remember, we started the whole thing started to actually have a big, impactful movement starting around 2012 in general, right? I mean, we had a lot of conversation before that, but it started at that point. And we started first with diversity in general, and then we added inclusiveness. Now we are talking about equity. So we are adding to the scope creep. Right? No, just I'm joking about that.
I think we're adding to the understanding that we can't have effective diversity without an inclusion and equitable best practices, right? We cannot leverage diverse talent. We cannot retain our diverse talent without culturally intelligent and effective best practices related to how we create psychologically safe places for our teams. And one other big challenge we should touch upon before we move on to any other questions, Amrita, is touched upon it in the text there, assuming DEI is a part-time role. And I think, Sherry touched upon it with the ERG support, right? Giving a clear mission, giving clear resources, having a clear understanding of how we're going to achieve it, and stop assuming that it should be added to somebody's day job, because that's just not going to be effective.
That's a great point, Tina, over there. And since you guys have brought up ERGs, that are employee resource groups, I would love to ask you, what do you think are some strategies to prevent burnout in ERG groups and to even assure that, DEI doesn't become a part-time role, as Tina has pointed out? So Sherry, you've worked in the space for a while. Why don't you start us off?
Thank you. Absolutely. So one of the things I think we should really advocate for is to cap the volunteer term. And so if you're going to have 2 years on the steering committee, really support people and give them the permission and maybe even a gentle nudge to say, you need to step back and we need to have other people come in and take the floor. It's just too easy to start doing it, to love it, and to look up and it's 5 years later and you're burnt out and you wonder why. And then to Tina's point, absolutely, we need to compensate people. And I'm actually kind of torn about whether it should be straight up cash, because I think that there could be some, nuances to that, shall I say. But certainly having it be a supported part of people's performance objectives so that they get a measure there, having buy-in from their hiring managers so that there is bandwidth in a day to do DEI, and I'm going to add to scope for Fariba. I like the acronym IDEA because I just like that it's a great word that it becomes. But I will also want to talk a lot about access. I have a daughter who's a quadriplegic. I have had hearing and speech impediments. I do other things like that. I'm sure we all have stories. So access, inclusion, diversity, equity, access. So, we really want to make sure that we're creating that really tangible buy-in, that if I'm involved in IDEA in my organization, IDEA is just as important as any other project that goes to the PMO or any other mechanism that we have for intake and engagement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sherry, for sharing that. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I just want to add one thing, and that's recognize whether or not you're using equitable approach to how you're setting up and assigning individuals to ERGs. Who's getting tapped on the shoulder? Who's being asked to lead? As an example, I know organizations now are doing exactly what Sherry's talking about, and they're providing compensation, tangible monetary compensation for ERG leads. But the question I'm asking is, how are those ERG leads being identified? Is it equitable and fair in itself, that approach? So that'd be my only question to ask or comment to weigh in, but I really loved what you had to say, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry and Tina, for your comments. So since we start out and when we start out on this DEI journey, there is a fear, the element of fear that creeps up, right? So how can we ensure that fear doesn't prevent the effective implementation of DEI strategies? And Fariba, why don't you share your thoughts on this?
Well, when you talk about fear, I want to see the fear from two different perspectives, individual perspective and the organization perspective. From an individual perspective, let's separate them in two groups. The people that they're already privileged and they may feel that they're going to lose the influence and the power that they have, and not having that note that we actually had with Tina about they think that there's zero-sum, approach to inclusion and diversity. So that's one of them. And actually, in some cases, it may even turn to resentment. Like, I have been always here that they're here to take my job. So, why should I lose my job? Or why should I change my routine? And you know what? The other people, the people that are different from us, other people are kind of unfathomable till you get to know them. Their reaction, their background, their culture, whatever it is. I can tell you at the beginning, a few years back, one of my mentors was always telling me, Fariba, show your passion a little bit less. So I came across too much passion like now that I'm actually in a different level and I'm working, and I totally understand what he was talking about. But at that point, I'm just saying, this is me. I talk about everything this way, right? So part of it is about getting to know people, right? The other thing is the fear of speaking up. Like, some of the fear is from both sides is that people don't speak up. And I have a personal experience on that when we had the new CIO a few years back, and from US, actually. I think he was not very familiar with Canadian culture and diversity we had in here anyways. And I was making fun of my accent and, in a meeting in front of everyone, that I'm a very strong person, but I felt I want to go somewhere and cry, to be honest. But the reality is I didn't talk about it. My director at the time was in the room. He didn't talk about it. He just told me after the meeting, oh, it seems that you guys didn't stop on the right foot. And you know what? Those type of behaviors, they should not be tolerated. But is there any channel in those organizations, or that strategic alignment that Sherry and Tina are talking about, that you can have a safe place? You can go and actually speak up about whatever is happening with the goal to resolve it, not to basically, cause some trouble or anything. So part of the fears are those, like losing losing control or losing your job if you speak up? And then from an organizational perspective, again, what is the impact of implementing diversity and inclusion in my organization? How much it's going to cost me from a leader's perspective? Even things I'm sorry to say, but some pushback because of the Me Too movement. Like, I mean, better not to move to hire women. We might get, some challenges in there, right? There are different types of things that without having the proper practices in place, without having proper channels of resolving those issues in the workplace, is not going to be solved.
Thank you so much, Fariba, for sharing that. And I'm so sorry that happened to you, especially with the accent. And as somebody who's also an immigrant here in Canada, I've often heard, oh, your English is so great, like it shouldn't be. So it is a very common theme here and, around the world, this fear that plays out. So as we talk about fear and as we talk about ERGs as well, how can we think beyond just, employee resource groups to ensure that the product and processes and systems we build and maintain keep, as Sherry pointed out, IDEA, which is inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility at the forefront? Sherry, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Rita. And I wanted to just mention, thank you again for that lovely introduction at the beginning. And I was remiss, I forgot to put in my little blurb that I had chaired an ERG for a while. And then before that served as a project manager and then was also a member of another ERG, all the while doing my day job. So I had a series of years where I was really thinking a lot about IDEA and about volunteering and about doing my day job and about trying to make a difference in the world and getting rid of my own unconscious bias. And I had this aha moment where it was really the Black Lives Matter movement talking about systemic racism. And it got me thinking about how every day as we do our jobs, we're either building or reinforcing policies, processes, and products. And for some of us, that's really home base. If you're a product manager, or if like Tina, you were a program manager and you were putting out games for, I don't know, can I say the company name? Yeah, big name. Tina had a great contribution with, tangible products. And I've been working in the technology space for 30 years and working on design for websites and, customer record management and all sorts of applications. And it occurred to me that part of our day job, probably for most of us, you could sit and you could think about what is on your plate right now. And without going to an ERG meeting, without hosting an event, without doing anything else, look at it and run it through. Is this initiative addressing IDEA? Probably one of the easiest ones is access. So you're working on introducing a website, or you just go to your company website. If someone were colorblind, could they read it? You call in and you're in the IVR system, that voice recognition system. If you got a speech impediment, are you stuck in there? You might have opportunities for yourself to look through your friends and family, your own lens, and do like a quality assurance test on it. You might be in a discipline where maybe you're looking at requirements and you've got like your main success scenario, then you've got your alternate path. Who are your alternate path? Maybe you're in marketing and you're like laser focused on reaching one demographic. Stop and say to yourself, who is not in this demographic? So who are we building for? Who are we building with? And is everybody that's involved in that project being compensated equitably? And I think, you could probably apply that to anything that's on your plate right now and find a way that you as an individual contributor can make a difference in the products, services, processes, policies of wherever you are.
And if I could just add to that for you, Sherry, I really like what you said there. And I think the challenge, and we're going back to the challenges again, is where do we start? What do we work on? Should we do it for the website? Is that the highest priority for our organization? I've got a client right now, very significant financial services organization that feels like, hey, we've solved the diversity equation, but we're losing our talent as fast as we're acquiring them. We have not solved inclusion and belonging. So if we go back to what is this organizational mission? Why does diversity inclusion, why does IDEA matter to us in this organization? that helps us create what we want to think about as our objectives and our key results, right? We can come up with our OKRs to say, why does diversity matter to us? What are we doing about it? Then we can start building in prioritization related to the smart actions we can take, measurable KPIs. We can start addressing some of that fear that we're seeing, because we're bringing it back to the mission again. We're bringing it back to the employee purpose. Why do I exist? And what's my role in this conversation related to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
That's so key. And I love metrics. I'm all about them. But here's a question. Here's a challenge.
Sure.
What do we do about the metrics we don't know we're gathering? So here's my user story. As an individual, more than one occasion, I've been on a phone system and it wants to do voice recognition and it can't understand me and my list, and I get stuck in there. And I have sometimes waded my way through and told the person I eventually reach and offered up my services. But quite often I hang up and I leave, and they never know that they didn't get my money. Never mind why they didn't get my money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know I have an answer to that one.
No, I guess I just maybe to say that maybe when we're coming up with metrics, there should always be a little caveat that we don't know what we don't know. And anecdotally, we can say that designing for diversity is actually not just the right thing to do, it's the profitable thing to do.
Yeah. To me, an example of that would be, as you said, are we involving the right people in design? That's the metric. Are the right stakeholders involved in the conversation to ensure that we're creating an accessible and inclusive product design that touches the needs of the audiences we're serving? In games development, this is, for example, a lot to do with gender equity. We have there's a challenge in games industry related to a lack of females in the industry, and yet more than 50% of gamers are women.
Right.
And so, how equitable or how accessible are our game designs because of that to that audience?
Mm-hmm. Wow, Tina, that I did not know about that statistic. So thinking about, of course, inclusion and representation, let's talk a little bit about diversity in hiring practices. So what would you think are some key hiring practices a company should keep in mind to foster DEI in the workplace? And Sherry or Tina or Fariba, any one of you can take this.
Fariba, do you want to start?
Yeah, hiring practices are, to me, very interesting. Basically, we don't know that we are biased. Like, I can tell you that because I was just telling you guys that I was in the whole day interviews, right? And I notice my own biases when I'm hiring, like when I'm going through interviews. So how we can get rid of these biases in the first place? What type of practices, what type of processes, what type of policies we need to have in there? That I remember we were doing some exercise with the Squares. You know that I've been president of a Square Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology, and actually one of the organizations that is very high in promoting diversity and inclusion is the Squares. So I learned so much from them. And we were going through this exercise, this project actually, to build the practices for the HR departments. But how you're going to implement, what I found is extremely difficult. At the organization level, as Tina and Sherry were suggesting, you have to actually get the right stakeholders to see what are the first things you want to tackle. You cannot do everything. You cannot boil the ocean. You have to pick and choose a chunk that you can deliver actually. And then start with the basics as much as possible. But I would go another level. I think all of the HR people, they have to actually take that Harvard Business School assessment of like unconscious biases and know about their own biases and have another lens on top of whatever they are doing when they are doing it. Honestly, I do that myself. Like, I mean, when you go and I'm just thinking if this person was a man or a woman, or if it was from another culture or with a different accent, would I think differently about it? You know, and I see that I would. So those are some of the things we can do from a policy perspective, from practice perspective, but with a small chunk that can be delivered, and also from a personal perspective, from individual perspective.
For me, it's about consistency. I mean, if we can just simply start with doing an audit of our practices to say, where are we being consistent and where are we being ad hoc? And even a small organization can do that. A large organization should already be doing it, right? But smaller groups can do that. And we can audit the whole talent management cycle. How are we attracting? How are we interviewing? How are we promoting and developing? And how are we onboarding? How are we offboarding? But if we look specifically at hiring as an example, I saw some fabulous practices at EA. I worked for electronic arts for almost 15 years. And we did some beautiful practices around training or interviewing committees. We had very consistent questions we would always ask our candidates. We had a pretty consistent process. I think one of the biggest things we missed, though, we would ask the same set of questions to every candidate going into a given role. We didn't define a good answer. So where do you think bias can show up? We all get up in a room and we start talking about that candidate's answers, and somebody says, I like that answer, or they have that credential, or did you hear what they said about that? Well, did we say those were important credentials, or that kind of a story would represent a good example? So I think it's very important that the hiring committee align before they start being involved in a debriefing and screening process, to be aligned on how we talk about not just a good question, but a good answer. What are we looking for in a candidate so that we can get more equity and remove a little bit of the bias, at least mitigate some of the bias related to how we bring on our diverse talent.
Awesome. I'd like to add about getting that pipeline so that from the get-go, you're actually having, exactly. right? So a couple points about that. As a hiring manager, one of the things that was really shocking to me was I went into a role that had quite a strong contractor contingency. So my team was maybe no more than a quarter to a third full-time employees, and the rest would be contractors. And the full-time employees, our recruiting department would come through HR, and they were working really hard on diversity and inclusion and had some good practices in place. But then for the contractors, I'm working with staffing vendors, and that's slightly different. And I'm not saying that they didn't, but what I can tell you is that I got to a point where I thought, now it's no coincidence that I haven't seen a resume for one woman in one role yet. So when I'm talking to my staffing vendors and they want to take me for lunch or coffee, I started to say to them, why am I not seeing any women? And then I just started seeing only women. And only one of the staffing vendors said to me, you know what, in my entire career, you're only one of 2 people that have ever asked me for equity, and so or for diversity in gender roles. And so what I did was I sat and I spent some more time and I spoke with him. And what he told me is that so often as hiring managers, what we do is we say, I'm really busy, just give me your top 3. And in order to feel like they're going to have a better chance of placing your candidate, they're going to give you the one that they feel is the most palatable, which unfortunately can be your young, white, straight male. Horrible. And so I think, maybe, people that aren't hiring managers don't know that that's happening. So I just want to put that out there, and then to talk about, proactively say to people, hey, you could be in a wheelchair to do this job. I'm open to different races and ethnicities. I'll give you the best candidate no matter what. Or you might even want to say, hey, I need to build diversity in my team. I want a different perspective. If you're not a hiring manager, I would like to talk about asking about diversity in your interview. And I've seen that come up. I was at UBC at a hackathon event, and we had 2 women present on our judging panel, and we thought we were showing a lot of diversity. And about 5 of the students at UBC said, how come you've only got 2 women? I'm not sure I'd want to work for your company. And that went all the way to the top. We were like, hey, we thought we were making a really good impression for recruitment, and we weren't. So if you're in an interview and you ask questions about diversity and inclusion and equity, that actually filters up. Hiring managers talk about what candidates are asking about, and that can be really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sherry, for sharing that. And an interesting question related to this has popped up. So in hiring, would not the internal attitudes of hiring managers be more important than any external tools they employ? And how can that be dealt with?
Yeah. So I like this question a lot, and I'm glad that it got raised, because this goes back to how we mitigate the human nature that we're all biased. And that's not a problem because it's just part of how we're hardwired. But what are the opportunities that we can provide to hiring managers to guard against that? And there are a number of tools, that frameworks that we can use, there's skills that we can teach them in order to be more culturally intelligent and more effective in the way they assess their talent. And again, it goes back to the consistency of being clear on what are we looking for in our team? Are we trying to mitigate against affinity bias or not? Is there a problem with diversity in our team? Or have we solved the diversity? And as a hiring manager, I need to be more concerned with how I'm onboarding my new talent once I bring them on. Am I asking my recruitment team to look for diverse talent in all of the right places? To Sherry's point, are we as hiring managers being encouraged and celebrated through things like our own performance measures to build and be effective and inclusive leaders and have diverse teams? And so if we don't provide mechanisms to help develop the skills in our hiring managers and celebrate them for doing the right thing, then maybe they won't. Then we're not going to solve that issue of internal attitudes and wanting to hire people by like ourselves, because let's Fariba touched upon it. It's hard to work with people different than ourselves. We have to work a little bit harder. There's huge, beautiful benefits from diversity, but it takes effort. It takes cultural intelligence. It takes the ability to work with somebody different than yourself.
Yeah, I can add to that. Like, I think to a start, build diversity. Definitely all of this matters. But as we go, get more people in leadership role, more diverse people in leadership role, in hiring role, you are going to naturally see some movement happening. And I'm telling you this because it was last year I noticed. Last year I had about 12 people in my team, and I noticed that these 12 people, they're from 8 countries. And I have different genders, different ages, different color, different ethnicity, everything. And I never thought about it, to be honest, to be diverse. I just was trying to get the right person in my team and use their strengths. And the reality is this team has been really successful for different reasons. One is everybody brings some strength that the other people don't have into the team. And this is our culture of our team, that everybody uses their strength, the natural strength, and then just ensure that we support each other as a team. And as though some of those people are getting now into hiring positions, and when they hire, they do the same thing. So I think it's gonna cascade after a while, but at the beginning, we definitely need to have that push, that force, that strategic alignment, that compensation, whatever it takes to make it happen, that celebration of the hiring people, that they actually have the awareness and they try their best, right? After a while, hopefully it's going to be a history lesson in future, right?
Let's hope for that, Fariba. And since we are on the topic of diverse teams and talking about, what is your perspective on hiring quotas for implementing DEI strategies? And Sherry, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Oh boy, they are not fully formed. I'm really mixed on this one. I have, Fariba, I was also really, really proud of building a diverse team. And I had diversity, not just in gender and ethnicity, which we think of right away, but like in age and in technical versus business expertise, sexual orientation, parents, non-parents. Like I was so happy that I had this really robust team with all this variety of perspective, and I worked hard on it. But every time that I was filling a role, I would say, like, whoever is the right person for the job is the right person. So if that happens to be a straight white male with a development background, great, but I'm not going to limit myself to that. But then I made some friends and people from different places. And one lady I was speaking to is an African-American in the inner city. And she was talking to me about how, in our organization, if you don't mandate that we're going to stand behind hiring people of color, we will never have people of color in our organization. So I don't have any slick answers. I would love to hear from the other 2 panelists. I think that there's a lot of flexibility and ground to be gained here.
I want to tell a personal story first before I answer the question. So I had a very uncomfortable conversation with a dear friend who I used to work with. and we were talking about this very topic, and she was very passionate about the idea that we do need this kind of a quota system. And I was really struggling with it. And I struggled with it, I told her, because I have a son. And yes, I have 2 daughters, but I have a son. And I really struggle with the idea that my son's going to be, possibly as good or the better candidate, and he's going to not be selected purely on the basis of his gender. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. And I do recognize what Sherry's saying, that some organizations may never change without some level of accountability. And that goes back to, what we talked about on the hiring. How are we holding leaders accountable for inclusive best practices and showing a caring about diversity? What can we measure that they can be held accountable for? Or what are we doing to mitigate bias as much as possible in the hiring process to manage the impacts of bias related to it, whether it's in the way we bring in the talent, where are we recruiting the talent from, how are we screening it? Again, going back to those recommendations on how we're interviewing and defining the good answers consistently for all applicants ahead of time. So we can do things to mitigate against it. I have really got mixed feelings on this one, though. I can't say, yes, I'm a fan for it. I suspect some organizations do need to probably implement some degree of quotas in order to push back against long-term systemic bad practices and to see real change, but it's got to start top down. It just, we can't start asking a middle line manager to suddenly have to have a quota system. That just isn't going to work. At least that's my opinion.
Thank you, Sherry and Tina, for sharing your opinions. And I do appreciate your honesty in accepting that we don't know what the right answer is, and there might be some flexibility and some compromise that may have to be made. So moving on from here. So we've talked about implementing strategies. Let's talk about sustaining those strategies and also ROIs. So how do we measure ROIs for like Sherry has coined the term IDEA? So Tina, would you like to start?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, this is a lot of what I'm doing right now with my clients, is how do we measure impact and return on investment related to the work I do for them, which is help build bias and inclusion programs and build out diversity programs and build cultural intelligence in leaders. And one of the more tangible ways we can look at is how much does it cost us to lose to have a regrettable staff loss? How much does it cost us to bring on board, attract, on board, and hire that talent and then lose them 6 or 12 months later? And that's happening because of equity and inclusion issues in organizations. We can measure the cost of that quite easily simply by taking account of those numbers. We have to start by measuring what matters that diversity and inclusion could help us with. And for every organization, this is going to be different. As an example, in games development, we would have something called overhang. So unplanned work at the end of the milestone, and you had to either crunch the team or cut features or do something about it, but there was a cost associated with it. Well, if we're doing really good, inclusive, effective production practices, I can measure the reduction of that. I can measure who's leaving. I can measure who's being promoted. I can measure productivity gains. I can measure cultural intelligence gains. Is my team improving? Are we becoming more effective in the way we manage inclusion in our organization? We can measure engagement surveys. If employees are more engaged, they're going to be more productive. And again, every industry is going to have a different way of being able to measure that productivity. But I'd be hard pressed to believe that no industry couldn't do that by saying, here's our benchmark. Here's the numbers we think that might be touched by better inclusion and equity in our organization. Now let's measure them 6 or 12 months later, whether it's related to who we're hiring or what we're doing as a business, our bottom line impact. Mm-hmm. I hope that helps answer the question. There's so much to this question, though. It's really very, very contextual to the organization, the industry, and the person's context.
I just want to say that I cannot take credit for IDEA. I stole it from someone else. I just love it. But Tina, as you're talking, something that's really sparking for me is that maybe the answer to our quota question is that if we have good metrics in place, and if we have good policies around incentivizing inclusion, then we don't need to mandate quotas.
Exactly. If leaders are being rewarded and recognized both monetarily and in acknowledgement globally and in the organization, and for being equitable, for being inclusive, for hiring diverse talent, for having diverse teams, for being effective leaders, then they're going to do it more. Mm-hmm. They're going to, walk the talk.
Thank you so much, Tina, for sharing that. And we do hope that companies start doing that. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of companies. So my next question is, does the implementation of these DI strategies that we've been discussing change within an organization with a multi-generational workforce? And Fariba, would you like to take this question?
Sure. Most probably it's going to change, With each of these generations comes distinct employee expectations. When you think about topics around rescaling, upscaling, or, holistic employee wellness programs, or things like leveraging social media, flexible work arrangement, all of those things, even in one generation is going to be not the same. But just imagine if you're talking about baby boomers and Generation X and versus millennials and like a Generation Y or even Z right now that they're in the workplaces. So they have different needs, they have different, training required. And for some of them, like a younger generation in general, is much easier for them to go for diversity. Why? Because in general, they have seen more diverse people as they were growing up. They are growing up in a culture, in a time that actually in an era that there are a lot of these conversations are happening and they learn in the school and everything. But ultimately, it is not about age. Reality is that it's about mental agility of the people, and is probably more about willingness and courage than age. And I know there are some people that they're, older and they're intellectually much daring than some of the younger, more rigid people. So on that note, I don't think one method is going to work for everyone. And definitely what would happen, similar to what we are talking about, every organization, they have to plan for themselves based on their industry, based on their needs. I think every organization, based on their culture, they have to start with the baseline first and say where they are and where they want to go and how they can measure this movement. And again, my belief is like the organizations, they need to define a small and iterative approach to those changes to diversity and inclusion and equity, because it's not that easy to go forward. And again, going back to my project management thing, I think it should be an agile way of like implementing all of that. Otherwise, the reality is the waterfall methodology doesn't work. So it's going to be very expensive, and the measurement of the value that you're going to deliver is not going to be there. So you want to have those iterative approach to it and then learn from it and apply more. So definitely it's going to need some different view of and practices organization based on the organization, what type of generations are working in there and what type of culture the organization is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Fariba, for sharing that. And of course, it's definitely about our mentality and how we approach diversity when we talk about this. So I think my last question for the panel before we open it up to the audience is on psychological safety. So psychological safety is being able to show and employ your own self without fear of any negative consequences in relation to self-image, status, or career. So how can or how should organizational leadership support psychological safety in the workplace? Mm-hmm. Tina, go ahead.
I'll start. I think the biggest one is lead by example, right? The leaders themselves need to be asking for feedback, asking for help, acknowledging their mistakes, calling out and seeking out different opinions than their own. I mean, we have to start there. I would say additionally, celebrate the mistakes of the team, like remove a culture of blame and instead replace that culture of blame with a culture of curiosity. Seek to help each other understand what's going on. encourage the team to ask thought-provoking questions when problems arise and seek to understand. And then the third tip is make sure you're providing different mechanisms for different voices to be heard in different ways. To Fariba's point, right? Different people communicate different ways. Different generations have different motivations related to diversity and inclusion. So we need to recognize that cultural diversity, we need to reflect on different ways to get all voices heard. Whether it's, because they're more internal and need time to reflect, they want to write it down, they want to be anonymous and have they want to be part of a group conversation rather than a one-on-one debate. There's different ways we can ensure all voices are heard. Those are the three fundamentals for me. Lead by example, celebrate mistakes and replace it with the culture of blame with the culture of curiosity, and provide mechanisms to ensure different voices are heard.
Awesome. Sorry, Rita, I wanted to add to that, if that's okay. We think about psychological safety so much about like a safe space to talk, or that if I am struggling with a mental health issue, my HR department and my managers are going to support me, and those are all great things. But I want to also talk about code switching. So if you're not familiar with code switching, we've all do it. You go to grandma's house and you clean up your language. You go to church and you wear an outfit that is very different than the outfit that you wore out with your girlfriends to the pub the night before, if you were like me before the pandemic. And so in its most innocent, amiable sense, it's just about being appropriate in different spaces. But it can be incredibly dysfunctional. And I have to admit, of all the areas that I've looked at in my journey, this is where I have found the most bugs under that rock for myself. I have had so much unconscious bias in this arena. So if somebody speaks with poor or writes with poor grammar, maybe they're ESL, and maybe this is an opportunity for me to consider the other talents they bring to the table and not do an ixnay on the resume because I didn't like the way that a participle hung. If somebody naturally has very curly wild hair, and maybe that hair is a fro, do we insist that it be buttoned down in order for them to be professional? In the pandemic, one of the wonderful gifts of the pandemic is we've really rethought what professional means. So I'm doing this call barefoot. Other than that, I am dressed the way I would for the office. I love seeing kids and animals and pets and dirty laundry and reality. I love that. But it also has meant like I'm seeing tattoos and nose rings and things that I didn't see before. So when we talk about psychological safety, I just want to put it out there that for many people, how they present themselves at work has had to be incredibly different than the authentic self that they present themselves with anywhere else. And now when it's work from home world, it's the ante is upped because if that's who you are, you've had that sort of in-between time in your commute, or you're putting on your game face, or you're changing your demeanor to fit in, but now that's your home. And that's really difficult. And so I think we need to really think about that when we think about psychological safety.
And Amrita, I want to add some stuff, tag on what Tina and Sherry were talking about. I think some of the things organizations they can do is, like, for example, provide opportunities for mentorship, like between diverse group of people. And what Tina was talking about, hearing all of the voices. Some people, they process things in different speeds, in different ways. So those quiet voices sometimes are very important to be heard. Organizations need to create the time and the space for group discussions that is safe, with the group dynamic that people can actually speak up, be able to bring things up. And if there are a person who is responsible, for example, for lack of safety, they need to be trained or they need to be removed, right? So, but you need to do those type of, you have to have awareness. The other thing is like what they call it, flip it to test it. Just think about it, look at the behaviors and whether if the opposite group was doing something, if it was acceptable or not. And I think from a leader's perspective, they should not walk away from tough conversations. They should be able to, speak the truth. And the most important, that from my own example I was talking about, if they publicize how to and who with to discuss problematic situations, that can help a lot. In my situation, I didn't know anything where I can go and talk to anyone, so I got quiet, right? So those are some of the things. And I think in that case, HR maybe is the advocate for employees rather than employer themselves. So that would be one of the solutions.
Thank you so much, Fariba, Sherry, and Tina, for your amazing contributions to this conversation. I'm sure our inquisitive audience members are really excited to know more. So if you have any questions, feel free to mute yourself or put it in the chat. If I've missed your question in the chat, please send it again so that I can ask the panel.
While we're waiting for that, I just want to mention, so one of our attendees touched upon reverse mentorship, and I'm not sure if this is what was intended by that, so I may ask him to speak up, but I was thinking about when Fariba mentioned mentorship, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and it's important, especially when it comes to women and minority groups, to recognize the difference. Again, let's define them. Mentorship means we're implying somebody needs to be leveled up. We're improving them. Sponsorship implies I'm capable and you're going to give me an opportunity. So recognize who's being sponsored and who's being mentored. Historically, as an example, men have 5 times more sponsorship opportunities than women in business.
True.
So who's being sponsored and who's being mentored, and we know the difference. But I'm not sure if that's what was meant by reverse mentorship. So feel free to jump in and unmute yourself, Carlos, if you want to add to that.
Okay, all right. So if you would like, you can unmute yourself, but we do have a question in the chat from Namna, and he says, how would we advocate for EDI education and initiatives with individuals who don't see its value?
I have a quick question related to this. Are we talking about individuals who are in the EDI space? Like who is the
mostly this is like a change management related struggle that we face while implementing EDI strategies. The friction that we face from the different departments, mostly.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So I think it goes back to why do you care and why should the organization care? And we talked about those ROI conversations. What would be the benefit of being a more diverse or inclusive organization? Because we should be able to measure the impact of the business, whether it's better products or retaining our diverse talent, or having more productivity in our teams. Having more engaged teams results in more happier teams, results in more effective teams. So what can we measure? We can improve. So I think it really would depend on your business. I'm happy to have an offline conversation if you want to reach out to me about this topic. It's part of my role as a lead consultant. But yeah, it's something that's, again, very contextual. And it goes back to trying to find that ROI for your business. What would that be? And helping them see it. And for every department, it might be different.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for answering that. So we do have a question from Allison, and the question is, in most industries, we see decreasing diversity as we move up the ladder. That is, many women in frontline positions, but fewer women in leadership positions. So what are some of the key things that an organization can do to change that balance and have more women holding top leadership roles?
The first one is more sponsoring versus less mentoring. But perhaps Fariba and Sherry have additional thoughts. I know Fariba likely does.
Oh yeah, believe me, I can tell you this. Something happened in 2011. So when I moved to Canada, I was already head of a department in Iran. It was an IT department for an international company, and my dream was that when I immigrated to Canada, what happens is after a couple of years, that you're an immigrant, you have to start different places. You cannot just start from the same place, learn, some of the systems and everything. I'm going to get there. And guess what? 20 years later, I'm not even there yet, right? So that's why I started in 2011, my own goal setting and SMART goals, and I'm sure many of you knows this, what the SMART stands for, and action plans for my short-term and long-term. And my goal was that even if I cannot get to that level that I was when I immigrated, I can help other women to get there, and basically to challenge the status quo, because that's the reality. When you go to the boardrooms, when you go to the executive rooms, meetings, you see mostly, you don't see many people with accent. You don't, at that time in 2011, you wouldn't see that many women. And I was thinking, I'm a woman, I have accent, so I want to challenge that status quo. So there are lots of, again, movement has started from 2012, right? And I would recommend, the only thing is that creating more awareness, being active in those movements, that can help a lot. Actually, if you get a chance, read that book by Sally Armstrong. It's called The Power Shift. And it actually talks about it very with detail, and talks about the whole history of women and many scars that women they had to get there. And this last shift from 2012, with the support of social media, the kind of revolutionized the way it is going to work. And there is a great opportunity right now that we can actually make that happen. So that plus all of the other great work that someone like Tina is doing, like with their organization, those are the things that actually, when you see they're shaping, things are changing. And
sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead. So anyways, it is still a journey, but what I would say, get involved with the like-minded people and put together your basically unique brand, whatever it is, as a woman, what you can deliver that nobody else has, what is it that you bring to the table that nobody else brings. But instead of focusing on the gender, oh, I'm a woman, so I have to be given a chance, think about what is it you bring in. What are the strengths you have? What are the natural talents you have? What is it, that unique combination? And that can help you to get there. And believe me, there are lots of people out there that they want to become your sponsor if you can actually show them you have a brand.
So I want to take it back to the systems and practices, though. I want to put it back to the organization and their accountability in this conversation. And it's much like we said, we should have equitable hiring practices and how we screen talent. The same things goes for promotion and development. So if we're measuring and tracking statistics around who's getting promoted, who's getting development opportunities, we can start understanding, are we being equitable across genders, first of all. Secondly, if we look at, again, who are we bringing into the org so that they can move up the org? Are we only bringing them in at the entry level? Are we bringing them in at the middle level? Are we being equitable in that? Are we hiring? Somebody mentioned it earlier. We should make sure we're not just recruiting from the same universities because we're not going to get our diverse talent. So are we recruiting from organizations that are predominantly male and or industries that are predominantly male? Are we recruiting from the right places to see the diverse talent coming in? But really, it's probably more the onboarding and the inclusive, equitable treatment when you've got your talent there that deals with this equation of seniors. As the person pointed out, sorry, I forgot whose question it was, we've got the ladies in the room, how are we bringing them up the ladder, right? So as an example, promotions, development opportunities. In my old organization, you got tapped on the shoulder to go to a conference or to be part of a special leadership accelerator program. Didn't feel too equitable to me, to be honest. I mean, I got those opportunities periodically, but I didn't know how they came to me or why they might not come to a peer. So, and then you ask yourself, are we only tapping the people on the shoulder that we think can go and fly to that's over to Montreal next month because they don't have child and elder care responsibilities?
Yeah, I just want to add. Awesome. I just want to add to that, just, to come back to what can organizations do? I really challenge organizations and decision makers in organizations to take a good, long, hard look at what you think leadership looks like. Everybody says they want more women in leadership. And then when they think about what leadership qualities are, they have a bias towards somebody who's authoritative, somebody who has a commanding voice, someone who controls the room, somebody who is typically more of an extrovert. There's so much bias in there, and I see over and over and over again where women have the stats, they have the metrics, Tina, they have the success, and then the feedback that they get when they're going for promotion is, we just don't see you in front of the executive. We just feel like if you need a little bit more finesse in the boardroom. And I think what they really mean is you don't present the way we think a leader is. And we really need to rethink what leadership is.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so next question is from Stephanie, who says, for an organization who is just starting their own EDI committee strategy, can you recommend any resources or readings that would be good as a starting point to help set up your committees or your roles and goals?
So you might have noticed in the chat, Rita, I'm going to follow up with all of the participants through you and be happy to share a few links. There are a number of resources out there. There's some great webinars that I've seen run recently, and some that were hosted by our organization, and that our Global Diversity and Inclusion Practices Leader at Cultural Intelligence Center has facilitated. So there are a lot of great resources. I'm happy to share them. HRB has a lot of great resources on their site, and also happy to meet up with anybody for this conversation. It's a really big question, and I don't have an instant link to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Tina. And Tina will send it to me, and I'll send it to you through our post-event email, so keep a lookout for that. The next question is from Dr. Shahina, and the question is, someone mentioned blind resumes. So just wondering how blind resumes can be. And what about the interview? So I'm from a visible minority group, and I'm already worried before an interview.
I meant I'm usually worried before an interview. There already is a mistake, okay? Sorry about that.
So I can take a stab at this one. Well, and Fariba, you've been interviewing all day. I got 35 direct reports, and I have been interviewing probably 40% of my week for a month now. So what I try to do is to make sure that I read every resume in full, which not everybody does, and we probably don't have time for. But I think that that's the best practice that helps you see the full holistic human being. You can't help but notice the names. People could strip out names, but that gets very tricky right now, especially as we're trying to set up Zoom interviews. But as a hiring practice, I never go to LinkedIn until I've read the interview in full or the resume in full, and then I go to LinkedIn, and then because I don't want to accidentally be swayed by a photo. I think that my hope is that we don't need to have them to be blind, to be fair. That if the practice is that you look at a resume, regardless of what any demographic trigger there is to tip you off there, that you're looking at the whole thing. Resumes that really catch my attention are ones that up at the top, they have like a little graphic, like a little checkbox or something that says, here's why I think I meet your role, or here's the skill sets I bring to the table that are easy to read, maybe even in color. And then I would suggest that for hiring managers that aren't as thorough, grabbing their attention to go to why you think you're a great fit for this job, and grab it away from the name and any other demographic might be a good help.
Well, I can tell you, because we're a government organization, we have a very clear practice for hiring. So basically, I can tell you, most of the names I cannot pronounce when I receive the resumes. For me, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, and my name, some people, they cannot pronounce my name. So I'm totally fine with all of that. But what I do before, even when we are actually posting a job, we have very specific items as must-have in the resume. And we focus on those must-have, no matter who is actually the person. Sometimes we don't know if it's a he or a she or whatever. We just basically go and look at all of those. And then we say, do they have it? Do they don't have it? And then we focus on that. Now, the challenge comes when HR does the shortest thing, because they don't have all of the knowledge and expertise in my area to actually ensure that they find those shortlist like properly. So that, similar to you, Sherry, I go and read all of them myself as well, and then I just go, and then for each of them I put my notes that why I think this is a good one. And normally I am the one going for more wider, broader selection to interview than HR. So I normally expand it, and they say, no, these ones are very good. Like, I mean, I think they can do it. And to be honest, when you go there, and we are totally fine. As I said, my team is quite diverse. So in the interviews, it's just we're focusing on the what they can bring to the table, and practice is very well defined with the government, so we cannot really go away from it. So it's basically some of the competencies we are already assigned, and they are going to be applied to everyone equally, no matter what they are, who they are.
Thank you so much, Fariba. So our next and last question for the day is, what is the major difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, dignity, and justice? And which one might be a better framework?
I mean, I think we go back to what those terms mean, right? So diversity, do we have diverse talent in our bench? Are we attracting and retaining and developing in our diverse talent? So in other words, are we showing equitable treatment? Inclusion is about that psychological safety. Do we all feel like we belong, that we should be here? Some organizations focus on the term belonging versus the term equity. I don't think there's a better framework, to be honest, in my opinion. I think it's more, again, going back to the overarching, why are we doing this and what are we trying to achieve? What's good look like? Where's our golden star, shining star that we're trying to achieve? And I think there's more awareness of DEI as a term. So I think brand awareness could in itself potentially be leveraged versus I've not heard belonging, dignity, and justice as much as a framework and a term.
Yeah, and actually I like that idea, which is like inclusiveness and what was diversity.
I love the accessibility being brought into it. We miss accessibility too much.
Yeah. But honestly, I learned, when I was working on the Gender Equality Network Canada project for federal government, that we put actually a set of like a documents, draft policies for basically gender equality. It considered diversity in general. And I remember we were considering like accessibility a lot in there as well, but it didn't really hit me till I broke my ankle. And that was like about 2 months ago. And then I noticed that how challenging it can be for just having a temporary ankle broken, that I have to even go to the street, go do some shopping or whatever it is. And it hit me that, oh my God, like, I mean, unless you experience it, you don't know how important it is. That's why I'm really happy to hear about IDEA rather than EDI, actually. And
that proves the point so well, because your brain is completely unaffected by your broken ankle, except that you're probably tired, as I was when I broke my foot. But where your job is rewarding you for the contribution that you make with your brain, and your ankle being broken makes no difference. But if that kept you out of the workplace, that kept your workplace from all the contributions you have to offer. And we see that so much with any sort of access issue. I mean, we've had so many questions about, like, how do I sell this, or how do I measure the ROI, or how do I get buy-in? I mean, let's talk about, the resources that we're missing out on, the opportunities that we're not realizing. And if we need to get all, corporate about it, the money we're not making because Fariba with her broken ankle can't get to the workplace to give us the best of her brain. It's just not okay.
So I go for IDEA framework, so as a summary.
Thank you so much, both of you. We do have a question from Stephanie. Stephanie, would you like to go ahead and just ask the
Yeah, can you hear me?
I'm sure if we were going to have time, so I threw in an answer, but I want Stephanie to actually weigh in on what the full question was.
Yeah, perfect. So it might help if I give you a little bit of background. So I started with a new company back in May. And actually, to some of your points before, in my interview, I did ask about, what their stance is. Do they have an EDI strategy? Is there an EDI director? And a part of my training once I got hired was that I did meet our director of EDI and Indigenous education. And at that stage, I had said to her, you know what, I have a little background in this from my previous role. If you're building your EDI committee, I would love to be a part of it and help to build that strategy, because unfortunately at that stage, that had not been put into place. So we are here this week. I've been with the company a few weeks and I have been approached to be a part of the committee. The first meeting is in September. And I think back to your point, and I guess I'm asking for a bit of guidance here, because I've just kind of been tapped on the shoulder, told when the meeting is, but kind of how would I approach with the EDI director and the committee, you know, not even being compensated, but, you know, for the rest of the committee, what kind of performance, you know, professional development can we give? Yeah. You know, you had mentioned, you know, maybe it's a 2-year term on that committee. So I think I just want a few pointers of how to kind of start that conversation, and if that should be had with the director before the meeting, or if we discuss it in the meeting, if it hasn't already happened.
I'd be tempted to start with your manager myself before the director. Okay. Because basically you want your manager is the one most impacted by you being tapped on the shoulder for more work, right? Yep. So the question is, are they going to support and respect that that's going to be part of your day job? Are they going to take away a little bit, or do they expect that to be value add? And, and if it's value add, can you carve it out of your day job and still, you know, not put in a 10-hour day because of it? So is it feel realistic to add to your current day job? If it does, great. Then talk to your job manager more about, how will I be measured for this? Is this something you agree is a good use of my time? Because let's face it, we're there to support our managers and help make their lives easier. That's why they pay us. So yes, there's an organizational mission and we have these passions and these committees we want to be involved in. But at the end of the day, we have a paycheck and we have a boss that we're trying to support and help be successful. So ask them, is my involvement in this going to help you be successful? If so, how? How can I make sure it helps you be successful? How do you want to measure me for my involvement in it? As you start to ask those questions, it might help you understand whether or not you need to introduce the conversation of additional compensation, right? Some organizations are set up in such a way that it is almost above and beyond the day job. So they're acknowledging it and maybe they're adding $10,000 a year as compensation. I don't know if that's okay, but it's an approach. I hope that helps. And Sherry, I'm sure you have other thoughts because you've been heavily involved in this yourself.
Yeah, and that's great question. So Stephanie, I'm just wondering, you've met with the director. Are you aware of anyone else that's sitting on a current board, or is the board about to be formed? So we're starting from scratch. Yeah. So to your question, I think you're fine to wait until that meeting, but maybe have some homework and some questions to ask. And then if coming out of that meeting, you need to have a follow-up to get clarification, that would be a great point. But you're probably going to have similar questions as to other people who've been tapped on the shoulder. And to our prior question about not burning out, my suggestion would be like, go with an open mind and maybe a full notebook and see what happens as they're kicking off. And then I would really suggest that you be the voice of understanding exactly what success looks like, and per Tina's point, then marrying that up with what your manager expects of you. So just try to make sure that you don't get into a situation that has no boundaries, and know what you can give. So if after the discussion with your manager, thinking about you going and you say, I can give 10 hours a month, then when you go to that meeting and you have that to give, you only need to escalate it if what's being asked of you looks like it will be more than 10 hours a month.
That's great. Thank you. And I think you made a good point too, to ask, what are other committees doing as well? Do we have something in place for other strategic committees for the organization?
Oh yeah, thank you for following that thread. I have a few of them dangling here. So yeah, if the answer was yes, then some homework that you could do is to ask to meet with someone on one of those committees and then use that as preparatory. Or ideally, they have materials available too. So you could meet with someone, but you might not even need to. You might get a big sense by the materials that are available, and or asking if you can like audit or just sit in on a session or two with a mind to how you might contribute to the one that you will be joining.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Sherry, Fariba, and Tina, for your insights, for sharing your opinions, and also being vulnerable with us and our Lean In family by sharing your own personal stories. We really appreciate it. And especially for our audience members, thank you so much for giving us your time and energy. We know this is after work, during a summer month, during a heat wave if you're in Vancouver. So we appreciate you showing up and being here with us. So thank you so much.
Amrita, I wanted actually to say thank you to two gentlemen that you are in the session as well. I really appreciate to have more male representation in all of those. So good job for you. And I want just to have one thing. The wise person once said, when a mediocre, not a stellar, a mediocre woman rises up the hierarchy at the same rate as a mediocre man, then we can say that we have reached equality. Now, changed woman be diverse people. So that's what we are looking for, right? Just
and we've received equity. Then we've received equity.
Yeah, with that. So hopefully we can get there with all of these efforts that everybody is putting in.
It's been such an honor to be part of the panel, Amrita. Thank you so much. And if anyone's interested to have deeper conversations about some of the topics that I covered, I would welcome having you reach out to me. And yeah, it's just been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed being part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Tina, and thank you, Fariba, Sherry, for joining us. And if you guys would like, please share your LinkedIn profiles in the chat so that we can reach out to each other, we can connect and take this conversation a bit further from this Zoom meeting. So if you would like, just go ahead and share your LinkedIn profiles as well.
You bet. I'll do that right now.
Excellent. Will do. Thank you, Amrita.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amrita.